I've played tons of games across a wide variety of systems, and one thing I've learned is that you never really know what you're gonna get. You can't trust the names of the games, you can't go off what the box says, you kinda just have to swan dive into the experience and hope for the best. And that's how it's always been throughout gaming history. While I've covered a wide variety of topics, there's one that one of our epic firefighters, Bildo1977, suggested. In his comment, he asked for top 10 games that are flawed, but you find enjoyment from playing them anyway. And while I don't have a dedicated top 10 list for this, I can easily talk about 10 games that I feel are exactly that. So that's the topic of today's video. Let's begin. The Saboteur feels like someone tried to make a Noire action film using a Swiss Army knife with half of the tools missing. Pandemic Studios went out swinging with this one, an Irish rebel blowing up bad mustache man camps in a Paris painted black and white until you liberate it. Once a zone is liberated, we see the color return to the area. It's a great artistic choice that really shows how bleak life was under the era of occupation. The game is messy in that lovable way, shooting Nazis with guns that handle like wet cardboard tubes and sneaking around with AI that couldn't spot a man on fire in a broom closet. But the atmosphere, the vibe, the wild, chaotic energy, it carries the entire thing. When the color floods back into the world after you liberate a district, it feels like gaming magic, even if everything between those moments is chaos held together with duct tape. To me, it's stylish, loud, uneven, and somehow still great. LA Noire is the definition of ambition outracing execution. The facial capture was groundbreaking. Every twitch and eyebrow raise looked like your screen was possessed, and the mood nailed that smoky 1940s detective energy absolutely perfectly. But then Cole Phelps opens his mouth, and the interrogation system flips a coin. One moment you're gently asking a suspect about their day, the next you're screaming accusations like you've just been possessed by a courtroom demon. And that massive open world, it's gorgeous, but it is emptier than my fridge at 3 a.m. Sometimes it can be funny though. You can straight up fire off a line of accusations that make people feel lower than dirt, and then when it comes time to prove it with the evidence you have, you can back out and all but say, "My bad, bro. LMAO." Yet the game hooks you, the cases suck you in, the soundtrack wraps around you like a warm Noire blanket. LA Noire isn't perfect, but it's an experience you keep thinking about long after the credits roll. The Ooze is one of those games that should not work in concept, let alone in practice. You play as a sentient puddle of toxic slime seeking revenge, basically a living, breathing OSHA violation. Everything about the game is slippery, literally and figuratively. Movement feels like steering jello with a fan, enemies will kill you instantly, levels wind around like someone spilled a bowl of spaghetti on graph paper and said, "Fuck yeah, that's a level." In fact, I revenged this game a long time ago, then I went back and made it pretty far. The problem is, it has that Sega Technical Institute level of bullshit difficulty, where stages just get entirely too long and too hard for their own good. And still, there's something addictive about absorbing enemies, growing larger, and melting everything in your path. It's gross, it's weird, gleefully offbeat. A beautifully bizarre experiment that only the 90s could produce. Syndicate came out at the exact wrong time, when people were exhausted with yearly Assassin's Creed releases and Unity had just given the franchise an absolute public meltdown, and because of that, a genuinely fun game tended to slip under the radar. Playing as the Fry twins in industrial London was a blast. The grappling hook makes traversal feel fresh again, letting you fling yourself across rooftops like Victorian Spider-Man. The city feels alive, colorful, and full of personality. Syndicate's biggest problem, though, is that it came out when nobody wanted to hear the words "another Assassin's Creed." In fact, to date, this is the most recent Assassin's Creed game I've actually played, and outside of Assassin's Creed II, I found this game to be wonderful. It isn't groundbreaking, but the joy of running around London with a grappling hook makes up for everything else. Driver is a game that somehow exists in two states at once, a broken mess and an absolute blast. The shooting feels like you're firing glue at people, and the on-foot gameplay is so stiff it could double as lumber. Cutscenes look like they were animated by mannequins who were developing emotions for the first time. This is during the time where there were non-stop GTAs and GTA clones being popped out. It's a time when Rockstar actually released games on time. You remember that? Pepperidge Farm remembers. But if you get behind the wheel, totally different game. Once you're in a car, driver suddenly transforms into this fast, cinematic, borderline brilliant driving game with chases that feel ripped straight out of an action movie. Cities like Nice and Istanbul actually feel exciting to drive around, right until a glitch sends a civilian flying in orbit. It's a bad game, but it's a fun game, and sometimes that's the best combo. Square Enix looked at the PS2 hardware and said, let's make an anime nightclub brawler that's basically a movie that you occasionally participate in. And that's exactly what it feels like. The bouncer is stylish as hell, awkward as hell, and short enough to beat on your lunch break. Its heart is in the right place. The cinematics still look cool, the music absolutely slaps, the combat is clunky, but it's satisfying in that early 2000s way where you can't tell if you're controlling the character or negotiating with them. The actual gameplay is where the cracks start to show, but even those cracks are kind of charming. Combat does feel like you're trying to pilot your character through molasses while they insist on doing dramatic spin kicks in slow motion. Sometimes you punch, sometimes the punch registers, sometimes you do a leaping combo that looks incredible but completely misses the enemy because the lock-on system had a panic attack. But when it does work, you get that classic PS2 brawler satisfaction I was talking about. Chunky impacts, simple crowd control, and enough chaos on screen to feel like you're in a playable action movie trailer. It's not deep, but it has its energy, that early PS2 experimental confidence that makes it impossible to hate. Oh shit, Singularity, what's up? This game brings back memories of a much simpler time where a website known as Demonoid was my source of gaming entertainment. Starting a torrent before going to school and coming home to a game that might have a virus, but that's okay, because it was free. Singularity is an interesting game, but there's a lot of mechanics that I feel have kind of been used by other games. In fact, it literally feels like Raven Software sat down and said, okay, we've made shooters for 15 years, what if we just use all of it? It's like they walked through the studio storage room grabbing mechanics off the shelf. Time manipulation from Prince of Persia, Soviet paranoia from Stalker, mutant body horror from Doom 3, environmental puzzles that remind you of Half-Life 2, and it sprinkled a little Bioshock wannabe energy on top like powdered sugar. It should have been a disaster stew, a pot of leftover design philosophies reheated in the microwave, but somehow it worked. The game looks a little cheap in places and the story seems convinced it is the next Bioshock, but moment to moment, Singularity is a blast. Enemies explode in creative ways, the world is fun to poke around in, and the gunplay is rock solid. Oh man, the movie? A disaster. Absolute molasses-brained chaos. A film that somehow managed to make Deadpool mute, give us Barakapool, and still act like it was doing us a favor. The whole thing felt like Fox was speedrunning how fast they could misunderstand an entire comic universe. The game though? It feels like the developers stormed into the office the next day and said, okay, listen, we're fixing this. X-Men Origins Wolverine, the game, plays like a studio-wide apology letter written in blood, sweat, and severed limbs. It's the version of Wolverine everyone thought we were getting in theaters. This is Logan Unchained, the feral beast version, not the emotionally confused action figure from the movie. From that first moment where the first enemy gets turned into deli meat, you could tell Raven Software didn't just want to make a licensed tie-in. They wanted to make Wolverine, the actual character, claws ripping through bone, rage mode that practically shakes the camera off its hinges, and healing animation so gruesomely detailed you can see muscle knitting itself together like stop-motion horror. It's visceral in a way superhero games usually aren't allowed to be. It's almost therapeutic. Like the game is saying, hey, we know you suffered through the movie, have some catharsis, it's delicious, eat it. And yeah, it gets repetitive. How could it not though? You're basically playing an angry Cuisinart for 12 hours. The combat loop is 90% ripping people in half, and 10% walking into the next room where you'll rip more people in half. But the thing is, it never stops being satisfying. There's something primal about the way Logan moves, the lunging attacks, the air juggles, the brutal takedowns that look like they were mocapped by a guy who needed to work through some issues. Castlevania II is infamous, and for good reason. This is the game where NPCs lie to your face like they're all auditioning for a medieval insurance fraud scheme. The clues are cryptic, mistranslated, or just deliberately misleading. The progression often feels like a cosmic joke, as if the designer sat around a table and said, what if we make the player kneel in a very specific place for 5 seconds while holding an item that they didn't know they need? It's good design, right? And the day-night cycle? Ugh. It interrupts the game with the enthusiasm of stage manager who keeps forgetting that their mic is still on. Became less of a warning and more of a catchphrase for how brutally your momentum gets kneecapped. But here's the thing, buried under all of this jank, there's a weird brilliance at work. It's like being handed a rough draft to a masterpiece. So many ideas live in Castlevania II that simply did not exist on consoles at the time, or if they did, they weren't this bold. You've got a semi-open world long before the term was standardized. You got towns, NPC dialogue, leveling, equipment, exploration that breaks free from rigid stage-by-stage design, all in a franchise that had zero reason to color outside of the lines after the first game succeeded. You can feel the seeds of Symphony of the Night, Aria of Sorrow, Bloodlines, Dawn of Sorrow, all of that Metroidvania DNA being scattered here in their earliest, clumsiest form. Simon's Quest is clunky because it's the kid's version of something that would grow into a genre cornerstone. It's like watching a teenager plant the first tree in a future forest. And you can hate it, you can love it, but one thing you can't do is ignore what it tried to do. Enter the Matrix is what happens when a studio is given too much ambition, too little time, and far too much access to the movie's lore. And I say that with genuine affection because this was the game that made me feel like I was sneaking into the back rooms of a blockbuster film series. When I was a kid, this game felt like insider information. It felt like I was jacked directly into something forbidden, a digital companion piece to The Matrix Reloaded that expanded the world in a way no other movie tie-in had even tried before. But once you grow up and revisit it, well, oh boy, you start noticing everything. The seams, the shortcuts, the fact that entire levels feel like prototypes accidentally pushed into the final build, physics glitches that launch you into the stratosphere for no reason, stiff animations that look like stunt doubles rehearsing instead of performing, driving missions that are so loose and floaty it feels like the game is daring you to quit. You can practically feel the crunch bleeding out of the disc. But there's one thing that I always think about, and this is the part that keeps it alive. When Enter the Matrix works, it works. When it hits that perfect rhythm of slow motion gunplay and wire-fu chaos, the whole thing snaps into focus. Bullet time that feels satisfying, wall runs that send debris scattering across the screen, enemies flipping through the air like they're being operated by a very enthusiastic puppeteer, doors exploding into a million slow motion wood chips. It 100% nails the aesthetic of The Matrix in a way that honestly no other game is quite matched. Not Path of Neo, not The Matrix Online, not even modern Unreal Engine tech demos. There is a grime and a style here that feels uniquely early 2000s, uniquely experimental, and uniquely faithful. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think about this list? Are there any games that you think are fun, but kind of rough around the edges? Feel free to let the community know down in the comments section below. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home with us. We're a gathering of video game connoisseurs that love to remember when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you align with that, feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly affects the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.